The COBIT 5 Foundation Certificate, Module 2, the COBIT 5 Principles. Lesson 2, Meeting Stakeholder Needs. Welcome to Module 2, Lesson 2. In this lesson, we'll study creating value for stakeholders and the COBIT 5 Goals Cascade Mechanism. In the last lesson, you learned that an enterprise exists to create value for stakeholders. Therefore, every enterprise should have value creation as its main governance objective. To support this, the governors should identify stakeholder requirements, devise strategies and plans to meet those requirements, and ensure that the strategies and plans deliver value to the stakeholders. Although the enterprise should deliver value to its stakeholders, it should not do that at all costs. When considering how to satisfy its stakeholders, the governors of the enterprise should consider the use of resources. Resources are scarce and limited. If they are used for one purpose, then they are not available for another. Paying out a large dividend to shareholders this year might limit the ability of the enterprise to invest in new opportunities. Of course, not all shareholders have the same objectives. Some want to see the value of their holdings increase, while others are more interested in dividend income. Managing complexities such as this is another challenge to the governors. The governors must also take into account the risks associated with the activities of the enterprise. The Risk IT framework defines business risk as a probable situation with uncertain frequency and magnitude of loss or gain. Notice that the definition refers to a probable situation. The implication here is that risks are situations that are predictable. Predictable in the sense that the possibility of them occurring can be foreseen, and therefore we ought to be able to decide in advance how to respond. COBIT is concerned specifically with IT governance, and therefore with IT-related risks. The Risk IT framework defines IT-related risk as the business risk associated with the use, ownership, operation, involvement, influence, and adoption of IT within an enterprise. It's worth remembering that risk and opportunity often go together. Adopting a new technology can be risky, but can also provide great opportunities. Of course, risk is not an absolute. It is also a matter of perception and attitude. It is important that the governors understand the stakeholders' tolerance for risk and ensure that it is reflected in the policies, activities, and decision-making of the enterprise. Once again, there will not be a uniform view. Let's explore the issue of risk by doing an exercise. Take 20 minutes to draw up a list of possible organizational risks that the governors should take account of. Your list should include examples of IT-related risks as well as more generic risks. Your study guide contains some suggestions that we have identified. Why don't you check it out before going on to the next screen? The diagram on your screen illustrates our theme of delivering value whilst optimizing risks and resources. The governance objective of value creation has three aspects: benefits realization, risk optimization, and resource optimization. These three are not independent. Each one acts as a constraint on the other two. Okay, time for an exam tip. You will need to remember these for your exam. Every enterprise has a number of stakeholders, and in Lesson 1, you did an exercise to identify some examples. I'm sure you will have noticed that each stakeholder has their own expectations or requirements of the enterprise. For example, a shareholder of a commercial enterprise will want a good return on their investment, but a regulator will expect the enterprise to limit any adverse impact of its activities on the environment. These two requirements may not be diametrically opposed, but they are certainly not 100% in alignment. One of the challenges facing the governors of an enterprise is managing stakeholder requirements that are sometimes in conflict. In order to meet this challenge, the governors must negotiate in some way with the stakeholders. By negotiating, we include managing their expectations and influencing their requirements. Prioritize and balance stakeholder requirements. The enterprise must respond to the needs of all of its stakeholders, but must also decide how far to satisfy each need. Remember, the needs of stakeholders are not in alignment. It is possible to focus too much on one stakeholder at the expense of the others. And the governors must also take into account all stakeholders when making decisions. The variety of stakeholder interests has implications for enterprise decision-making. Specifically, for each decision, 3 questions should be asked. For whom are the benefits? Who bears the risk? And what resources are required? The governance system should ensure that these questions are dealt with. Okay, you've learned about the governance objective of value creation. Next, we'll take a closer look at the COBIT 5 Goals Cascade. It's worthwhile recalling that the Goals Cascade provides a top-down view of the enterprise that aligns activity with the stakeholders' drivers. Specifically, it links enterprise goals to processes so that if you can identify the key goals, you will know which processes to devote most attention to. We introduced this topic in Module 1, where you saw a diagram similar to the one on your screen. This version shows progress of the Goals Cascade through 4 steps. Let's think about Step 1 of the Goals Cascade. Stakeholder drivers influence stakeholder needs. We can identify some generic stakeholder drivers quite easily. For example, changes to the strategy of the enterprise. For example, a manufacturing organization might decide to outsource the manufacture of goods and instead to focus on design and marketing. Changing business environment. For example, increased competitive pressure or a harsh economic climate. Changing regulatory environment. Legislation and regulation tends to increase, and enterprises must continue to be able to demonstrate conformance. And new technologies bring opportunities and dangers. Web-based retailing continues to transform the way we buy goods. Many traditional retailers have been forced out of business, while others have adapted to meet the challenge. Stakeholder drivers vary between enterprises, between countries, and between industry sectors. They also change over time, of course. It is essential to respond to changes in the drivers by maintaining contact with stakeholders. The high dependency of enterprises on IT means that satisfying stakeholder needs often leads to a number of questions for IT. For example, internal stakeholders might ask, how do I get value from the use of IT? Am I running an efficient and resilient IT operation? And do IT projects deliver what they promised? And if not, why not? External stakeholders also have questions. A customer might ask, how do I know that my supplier is compliant with applicable laws and regulations? A business partner might ask, how do I know that my partner's operations are secure? Figure 7 of the COBIT 5 framework document contains other example questions that you should take time to read. COBIT 5 identifies 17 generic enterprise goals. Some of these are shown in the diagram on your screen. Figure 6 in the COBIT 5 framework document shows them all. This diagram has a number of interesting and important features. We'll discuss these over the next few screens. Take a couple of minutes to familiarize yourself with the diagram and then move on to the next screen. The first thing you might have noticed about the enterprise goals is that they are structured as a balanced scorecard. The balanced scorecard concept has been around for 30 years. Traditionally, commercial enterprises use financial measures to demonstrate and manage their performance. However, these measures gave a rear-view mirror picture of performance. They didn't tell you how the business would perform next year. The fundamental idea of the balanced scorecard is that to be successful, an enterprise must address 4 perspectives or dimensions of performance. The first dimension is financial. The second dimension was named customer. This dimension is about how the customers of the enterprise see it. Anyone who has held a sales role knows that it is easier to sell to existing customers than to win new ones, provided that they like the service they are getting. The third dimension was named internal. This is about how good the enterprise is at what it does. And the fourth dimension is known as learning and growth. This is very much about looking to the future. It's about having skilled people and being able to use them to develop new products and services. The balanced scorecard concept is widely accepted as a means of driving and directing performance improvements. The 17 generic enterprise goals identified by COBIT span these 4 dimensions. Another feature of the enterprise goals is that each one is positioned relative to the 3 main governance objectives: benefits realization, risk optimization, and resource optimization. An example is shown on your screen. You will notice that the relationship is categorized as P for primary or S for secondary. This indicates the strength of the relationship. If the relationship box is blank, then the relationship is weak or insignificant, though it does not mean that a relationship doesn't exist. The example on your screen is Goal 8, Agile Responses to a Changing Business Environment. This goal is concerned with, amongst other things, responding to competitive challenges and to changing customer needs. It's clear why this is an element of the customer dimension. If you remember that benefits realization relates to the degree to which customer needs are satisfied, then you'll understand why the goal has a primary relationship with this governance objective. The goal also has a relationship with resource optimization. For example, changing customer needs may impact the resources used to meet them. The relationship with risk optimization is less obvious. There may be a relationship, but it is much less strong than the other 2. Okay, you've learned about the 17 enterprise goals and how these relate to the balanced scorecard and the COBIT governance objectives. Now let's return to the subject of stakeholder needs and how these might be linked to enterprise goals. You'll remember that meeting stakeholder needs raises a number of IT-related governance and management questions. Experience has shown that these and other questions can be related to the enterprise goals that we've just discussed. A suggested mapping is shown in Appendix D of the COBIT 5 framework document. Again, you should spend some time studying this. You must understand, though, that this mapping is not intended as a mechanical exercise. You must identify questions and adjust the mapping to match the circumstances of your enterprise. Let's look at some examples of this mapping. An example is shown on your screen. The stakeholder need is, how do I get assurance over IT? It maps onto 2 generic enterprise goals: compliance with external laws and regulations, and compliance with internal policies. We'll see later how these enterprise goals map onto IT-related goals and from there to COBIT processes. Here is another example of the mapping of stakeholder needs to enterprise goals. What has been the average overrun of the operational IT budgets? How often and how much do IT projects go over budget? It maps onto 4 generic enterprise goals. First, Financial transparency. This goal includes, for example, understanding the cost of delivering IT services. Second, optimization of service delivery costs. In other words, ensuring that IT costs are proportionate and appropriate to the benefits gained. Third, optimization of business process costs. In this context, IT processes are a category of business process. Are the costs of each of the COBIT processes justified? Could they be performed more cheaply? And fourthly, operational and staff productivity. This needs no explanation. Let's summarize what we've just learned. COBIT provides a list of governance and management questions that the enterprise might have of IT. If you go to your business and ask what aspects of IT performance concern it, then you are likely to get responses that correspond to some of these questions. You can then map the specific concerns to enterprise goals and then set priorities and specific objectives. Okay, we've seen how stakeholder drivers can be mapped to enterprise goals, step 1 and 2 of the goals cascade. Next, we'll take a look at step 3, enterprise goals cascade to IT-related goals. In order to achieve enterprise goals, each functional area must develop a set of supporting goals that are relevant and appropriate to its activities and sphere of operation. COBIT identifies 17 generic IT-related goals. Some examples are shown on your screen. You can see that these are aligned with the dimensions of the balanced scorecard. In the financial dimension, a goal is realized benefits from IT-related investments and services portfolio. In other words, the money spent on IT technology and services should deliver some net benefit to the enterprise. Like policies, goals often seem to be statements of the obvious. That may be true, but it does not mean that they are not worth stating. It is all too easy to forget the obvious, to forget what we're here to do. Adequate use of applications, information and technology solutions is a goal in the customer dimension. The use of the word adequate is interesting. What do you think it's saying? Think about this for a minute before continuing. An internal goal is optimization of IT assets, resources, and capabilities. This goal explains itself. Finally, competent and motivated business and IT personnel is a goal in the learning and growth dimension. It's interesting that this goal includes business personnel. Remember that this is a goal for IT. What should IT be doing in order to maintain and enhance the motivation and competence of business personnel? Think about this for a minute before continuing. The 17 IT-related goals are listed in Figure 6 of the COBIT 5 framework document. You should take some time to study it. Step 3 of the goals cascade is enterprise goals cascade to IT-related goals. Each enterprise goal is supported by many IT-related goals, and each IT-related goal supports many enterprise goals. In some cases, there is a significant or primary relationship. In others, the relationship is strong but less important. This is known as a secondary relationship. Figure 22 in Appendix B of the COBIT 5 framework document suggests how the enterprise goals can be mapped to IT-related goals. The diagram on your screen shows a small section of the mapping table in the COBIT 5 framework. The diagram explains itself. We should stress that the mappings derive from experience gained in the field, so to speak. They don't have and don't require any theoretical justification. You should also remember that the mappings and strengths of relationships are not set in stone. The goals cascade provides guidance, very valuable guidance for sure, but it is not a blueprint to be followed unthinkingly. You should interpret, adjust, and modify it to match your specific circumstances. The diagram on your screen shows an example of the IT-related goals that support Enterprise Goal 15, compliance with internal policies. You can see that only 4 IT goals support this enterprise goal, with just 3 of them being very significant. Now let's take a look at goals mapping from the other perspective, the enterprise goals supported by an IT-related goal. Your screen shows an example. You can see IT-related Goal 10, Security of Information, Processing Infrastructure and Applications. This supports Enterprise Goal 3, Managed Business Risk, Goal 4, Compliance with External Laws and Regulations, Goal 7, Business Service Continuity and Availability, and Goal 15, Compliance with Internal Policies. In each case, the relationship is primary. IT Goal 10 provides significant support to those enterprise goals. Okay, you've learned about Step 3 of the Goals Cascade. Now we'll move on to the final step. IT-related goals cascade to enabler goals. We introduced the 7 COBIT enablers in Lesson 1, and we'll examine them in more detail in Module 3. Right now, we'll focus on just one of them, the 37 processes. Each IT-related goal is supported by one or more of the processes, and each process supports one or more of the IT goals. Once again, each relationship is categorized as primary, secondary, or weak. Figure 23 in Appendix C of the COBIT 5 framework document maps each of the 17 IT-related goals to relevant processes. Your screen illustrates a part of the mapping. You can see 3 processes represented, identified as EDM01, EDM02, and EDM03. The EDM part of the identifier is significant, but we'll cover that in a later lesson. A brief statement of the goal of each process is also shown. So the goal of process EDM01 is to ensure governance framework setting and maintenance. EDM01 has a primary relationship with goals 1 and 3, and a secondary relationship with goal 2. You should take some time to familiarize yourself with a full mapping that appears in the COBIT 5 framework, but you don't need to memorize it. Okay, you've learned about the component parts of the cascade mechanism. Now let's think about it end-to-end. Let's look at how it is used. The mechanism allows stakeholders' needs to be linked to specific IT processes. It allows high-level business concerns to be linked to IT activity, which can then be improved. Let's see how the cascade mechanism might be used in practice by doing an exercise. Aim to spend 20 minutes on this exercise, and don't forget to check out your study guide for our solution. A large bank has recently suffered a major and highly publicized failure in one of its IT systems that caused significant financial losses in addition to severe damage to its reputation. This has raised concerns in enterprises in many other sectors of the economy that they too might be at risk from their IT systems. The board of a large manufacturing organization has realized that it doesn't know how dependent the company is on its IT services. It has employed an independent consultant to assess the issue. It has stressed that it needs a preliminary evaluation as quickly as possible. Which IT processes might the consultant focus on? Okay, you've seen an example of how the goals cascade mechanism can be used. In this case, a top-down approach was used, and that is the main intended purpose. But it's easy to see that it could be used bottom-up. For example, an IT process manager might seek to justify an improvement proposal by linking it to the impact on enterprise objectives. Okay, we've looked at the goals cascade mechanism in some detail. It is a very important part of the COBIT 5 framework, and you must be familiar with it. Before we end this lesson, let's summarize the purpose and value of the mechanism. It allows priorities for implementing, improving, and assuring the governance of enterprise IT to be defined based on the strategic objectives of the enterprise. Specifically, the Goals Cascade defines relevant and tangible goals and objectives at various levels of responsibility. It permits objectives to be set at the enterprise level, at the IT function level, and then down to processes, functional units, and individuals. It filters the knowledge base of COBIT 5 based on enterprise goals to extract relevant guidance for inclusion in specific projects. COBIT 5 includes advice and guidance on many aspects of enterprise IT. The Goals Cascade allows you to zero in on what's most important at the time. And it clearly identifies and communicates how enablers are important to achieve enterprise goals. Okay, that's the end of Lesson 2. In this lesson, you learned about creating value for stakeholders and the COBIT 5 Goals Cascade mechanism. Module 2, Lesson 3 is next. In that lesson, you'll learn about COBIT 5 Principle 2, covering the enterprise end-to-end.